Communion text this morning is from Zechariah chapter 6, verses 12 through 13. Then you will say to him, Thus says Yahweh of hosts, Behold the man whose name is Branch, and he will branch out from where he is, and he will build the temple of Yahweh. Indeed, it is he who will build the temple of Yahweh, and he will rule, and he will bear the splendor, and sit and rule on his throne. Thus he will be a priest on his throne, and the council of peace will be between the two offices. This month, during communion, we have focused on those texts that foretell the coming of the promised Messiah as we prepare to celebrate Christ's first advent. And as we look at these prophetic messages, from our perspective in history, what has really been amazing to me is the connection between the past and the present. These messages, they're relevant to every age. God is not hindered by the confines of time. He controls all these things, the words that are spoken, the men that speak them, all the seemingly insignificant things that take place in between to bring these things to pass, absolutely all of it. So whether we're looking back at their fulfillment or we're awaiting it, we can gain great hope and encouragement. And God's message to Zechariah is certainly no different. In it we see Jesus depicted as the branch. He says, Behold, the man whose name is Branch, and he will branch out from where he is. And Jesus as a branch is a common theme in Scripture. It speaks of his kingly lineage, but also his humble beginnings. It speaks probably most of all of his humanity, but also we see that this branch is totally unique from all other branches. He is a branch from mankind that shoots off, unlike any other branch in the human family tree. This branch will not yield thorns like the original trunk and all those branches that came from it. This branch is going to be completely different. So he's a man, and yet he's unlike any man. And God begins his message to Zechariah by confirming as much. He says, Thus says Yahweh of hosts, Behold the man. And this phrase, Behold the man, is one that we hear elsewhere in Scripture. It's spoken in a scene that we're familiar with. And I think considering this event briefly will help us see this connection between the past and the present and God's sovereign control of all things. So in this scene, Pilate, having had Jesus flogged, and the soldiers having put a purple robe on him and beat him and put a crown of thorns on him, Pilate presents him to the Jews. And he is blameless. He's committed no sin. Even Pilate finds him guiltless. So he presents him to the Jews, and he says, Behold the man. And the connection with God's words to Zechariah, I think, is completely lost in those present, obviously, for they cry out, Crucify him, crucify him. And there's another scene that I want to contrast with this one briefly, and it's one that we're probably much less familiar with. It's in the 3rd chapter of Zechariah, and Zechariah records a vision that God gave him. And in this vision, he sees Joshua. Joshua is the high priest in Zechariah's time. So Joshua is standing before God in Zechariah's vision, and he's clothed in filthy rags. So he's like us. He has no merit of his own. He's completely fallen short of God's standard. And beside Joshua stands the adversary, Satan. And Satan is the accuser, and that's just what Satan is doing. He's accusing Joshua, maybe justly in some ways. But God says something amazing. He says, Yahweh rebuke you, Satan. Is this not a brand I have plucked from the fire? And then he takes Joshua and he clothes him in clean, pure garments. He gives him the right of access among those who are standing before God. And he says to Joshua, Behold, I will bring my servant the branch. And then he adds, and my servant will remove the iniquity from this land in a single day. And Joshua didn't merit this. It's the work of the branch that removed his iniquity from him. So I think it's amazing to contrast these two scenes. One, Joshua, no special branch of mankind, just like us, clothed in rags, standing accused by Satan. And this other scene, Jesus, the righteous branch, standing before Pilate some 500 years later, according to the foreordained plan of God, and standing unjustly accused by those he came to save. And Pilate and all those who are there, they're absolutely unaware that here is a branch of mankind that can restore all things. Here's the man whose name is Branch, who alone can mediate between God and man, just as God foretold through Zechariah. And indeed, he did branch out in that day in a way that no other man could. And then that day he removed iniquity from all those who belonged to him, plucking them as a brand from the fire. Much of this prophecy, is yet to be fulfilled, and we're certain that God will see to its fulfillment. But in it we see the great hope and anticipation of the season. Behold the man. That's the message of this season. Behold the man whose lineage is humanity and deity. Behold the great branch of mankind in whom we can have peace with God and access to his throne of grace. So you guys can come forward. Let us focus on these things in this season and this morning as we prepare to take communion together.